Here we go. Welcome to today's session on deploying application infrastructure as code. You'll be blown away by the magic that this can make possible. And with that, I will turn things over to our instructor, Sydney Andrews.
As always, thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today for the fourth part of our four-part series on end-to-end solutions with Microsoft Azure. We have had a lot of fun in this series talking about a lot of platforms and service options in Azure. A lot of great questions came up throughout this series on, how do we automate the deployment of these services? You saw many times when I gave demos that we deployed these services manually using the portal or using tools like Visual Studio Code. And today I want to really walk through how we can automatically deploy these using infrastructure as code solutions, or specifically with a hyper focus on Azure Resource Manager templates and double clicking even further down on Bicep as an alternative to the JSON language. If you follow us on our YouTube channel, Dev Radio, you probably actually heard about us talking about Bicep before. Language we're pretty excited about. A couple others are excited about it amongst our group, and we have a really good introductory video. I'm going to cover a little bit of that content, but I'm also going to show you how to deploy some of the services that we've talked about in this webinar, specifically using Bicep, so you can actually see step by step some of the nuances that's involved. Also, you'll get to see a little bit that dev workflow when I'm creating a Bicep template, and also some of the really cool features in Visual Studio Code is going to make it easier for you to author these templates. And this is coming from someone like myself who's done infrastructure as code in the Azure space for a while. Specifically, I was a really hardcore Azure Resource Manager person. I was very much waving the flag of everyone needs to learn how to build JSON templates. We should just force everyone to memorize the JSON template syntax. So it took a long time for me to come around that another language could work. So the fact that I came around makes me really believe that you'll come around to when you we take a look. So real quick, just my name is Sydney Andrews. I'm an Azure MVP. I have been delivering all the other parts in this series. We have been putting our source code on GitHub. I'm sure Matt has already published the URL. If he hasn't, I'm sure he's going to throw it up there soon to the Q&A. GitHub.com msusdev E2E_pass. That's github.com msusdev ete or end-to-end _pass. That's where we're putting all the demos and source code for this series. If you got questions, need help with this series, we've been trying to answer questions as fast as we can. We've been getting some really good questions, and we've been sending out some really good answers. Sometimes from Matt and myself, more times than not from different engineers and product team members who are much more knowledgeable of the world than us. But if you got questions, you go through this demo source code, you run into something that you can't get answered in Q&A while we're live here today, that's msusdev@microsoft.com. Once again, msusdev@microsoft.com. We'll try to help and get you an answer to your question. So this is a four-part series. We started talking about Azure Functions and API management, talked about how we could take existing applications where changing our code could incur great technical debt, or that sometimes just writing code from scratch to add new features could be technically prohibitive, and using services like Azure Functions API Management to just add new features, create proxies, enable functionality, extend and enhance our applications in ways quickly and efficiently that we could that would normally have very great difficulty doing if we just wrote everything from scratch. In session 2, we talked about logic apps and event grid and how we can use event-driven applications, how we can use logic apps to create workflows, and basically using eventing as a mechanism to connect the different aspects of our applications. In session 3, we went into Dapper. We dug in. We got to see how we can use Dapper as a Docker sidecar to our applications to add additional features that can be really useful to our applications. Storage, PubSub, the idea with Dapper was really just adding a lot of functionality that you commonly would have to build out from scratch to your application, but with a Docker sidecar that runs pretty easily on platforms such as Azure Web Apps and on platforms such as Azure Functions. Today, really want to go and double click on some of these Azure services we've been touching on and show you how to automate the deployment of these using Azure Resource Manager templates. And again, specifically using Bicep templates. So real quick, just go over the agenda, and then I just want to live the rest of the session in the browser, Visual Studio Code, because that's where we're going to be getting most of our work done. Four things we really want to accomplish today. I really want to just walk through a really simple Bicep example. One of my favorites that we did on Dev Radio and that I like to walk through here is just creating a storage account. That's one of the most core services we're going to use of a lot of these things like function apps, logic apps, web apps. They're all use a storage account underneath the hood. So knowing how to create a storage account using Bicep is probably going to be the key way that you can teach yourself how to create a Bicep template. Once we've done that, we will go in and create resources such as app service resources. We'll go in and create another really great one that's a little bit more complicated, and that's creating Azure Cosmos DB resources. We'll look at things like dependencies between different resources, how they're inferred. We can look at how we can explicitly set parent-child relationships between different resources. We'll look at nuances like how we create these resources, how we use the tooling, how we name things, parameters, variables, all that stuff that's always been there in Azure Resource Manager templates, but that's much easier to do here with Bicep. All right, so just that's enough for slides. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of PowerPoint, closing PowerPoint because I have no need for it anymore. I have the Azure portal open here, and I just have a demo subscription we're going to use. It only has one resource group. We're going to leave that alone because we don't really need it today. I have my Windows terminal already open to a folder. It's in my downloads folder called Bicep. And then I have Visual Studio Code open. This is going to be our playground today. I have it open to that same Bicep folder. Now, for within Windows Terminal, I'm going to use the Azure CLI. I've already ran AZ login, set up my account, set up my subscription, all of that. If you haven't, that's what you would do at this step. I'm going to just use the AZ group command. So AZ group, create, and I'm going to create a new Azure resource group called Bicep. I'm going to put this group in East US using a location flag or argument. I like to say argument. I know it's called flag, but I like argument. All right, so AZ group create. We're going to name this group Bicep and put in East US using location. So if I go back to the portal and I didn't really mess this up, I should be able to just refresh. And there's my Bicep resource group that I just recently created. So all is well, everything's working smooth. Now, if I want to create a Bicep template, I simply need to create a .bicep file. Now, Bicep is a specific language for Azure Resource Manager templates. There's another language available, and that's the JSON-like syntax that's normally used with Azure Resource Manager. Now, why do I say JSON-like syntax? That's because Azure Resource Manager templates, they normally look like JSON, but they have lots of functions and additional features in there that's above and beyond what's in the JSON specification. So it's a lot of fun whenever you look at a conference talk like at Ignite or at Build, and you hear the product team and engineering team get up on stage. They're really, really careful to say, it's JSON-ish, it's JSON-like, because they don't want to say it's a JSON template. And the answer is, yes, syntactically compatible with JSON. If you send this in an HTTP payload, it's going to register as JSON. Everything's going to look good. But the language they built for Azure Resource Manager templates in JSON, on top of the JSON language, is complex, has functions, has operators. It does it a disservice to call it just JSON. So the way I like to think about it is that when you create an Azure Resource Manager template, you now have a road that diverges in two. Do we write it in JSON with their extended and enhanced functionality, or do we write it in Bicep? And this really comes down to, as a team, what do you prefer? And this is also going to reflect the third-party tooling. A lot of third-party tooling today, they write their templates down into the JSON language. So a lot of these third-party tools will convert whatever their platform domain language is into the JSON language that's used in Azure Resource Manager templates. Let's take a look at that really quickly. So I go into the portal and I have this Bicep resource group, and I'm going to create a resource. I can either hit the create button here or just hit create a resource in my navigation menu. And I'm going to just create something really simple. I'm going to create a storage account. So I'll select create a storage account. I'm going to use my LRN subscription, my Bicep resource group. I'm going to call this storage account Hello Interesting World. Hopefully nobody's taken that name. Create an ECUS. It says standard storage account. Instead of geo redundant, I'm going to choose locally redundant storage. I'm going to hit review and create. Let's run some validation steps. And instead of creating this, I'm going to go over here and select download a template for automation. Now, what this does is it tells me what Azure Resource Manager JSON template Azure would have deployed if I hit create. Because remember, all this stuff I'm doing in a portal, I'm doing in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, I'm doing using the CLI or PowerShell or even third-party tools. At the end of the day, it translates down into this. This is this is the glue that makes everything else work. So I'm looking here, and it looks like there's a lot of things that's going on here. It has a resource called a storage account. It's a JSON object. It's pretty complicated because that wizard that we walked through has many different possible properties. So it looks like this super complicated JSON object has so many parameters. And then at the top of this JSON template, and we're not actually learning Azure Resource Manager JSON templates today. That's why I'm kind of skimming through it kind of fast because I want to show you Bicep, which is a little lot easier to go through. And go to the parameters tab and see that these are the parameters I chose. And then here's all the default ones they set for me. So even though I didn't go through the wizard, it selected some default values for me. So this is really interesting because essentially what happened is that I have this template, how to create a storage account, and it's passing all these parameters, all 22 of these parameter values into this template. So for the storage account, it's going to be deployed in ECUS. It's called Hello Interesting World, standard LRS. That's all stuff we picked, by the way. Stuff we didn't pick. Allow blob public access. Okay, true. Let's see. Soft delete retention in days. 7 days. So if we delete something, soft delete something, is going to retain it for 7 days in a recycle bin type object. It's, yeah, the technical implementation is a little different. Is there some other features here? Shared key access, that's allowed. These are things I didn't select in the wizard, but these are default parameters that are assumed by the template. So the idea here is that a combination of parameters I select plus some default values are used to fill out this template. So as you can see pretty quickly, just creating a single storage account using this JSON template has become this this domino chain of complexity. And this is coming from someone like myself who's taught classes on how to build these templates, and I'm a huge fan. I used to build these from scratch with no documentation. So even I can identify that this can be pretty complex and intimidating for somebody from outside coming in. So if I'm a person who's advocating for my customers to automate their infrastructure, how do I show somebody this? So the third-party world jumped in and said, okay, here's a whole bunch of third-party solutions to do this because these JSON templates weren't it. Well, on the same facet, the Azure engineering team understood that this JSON language is just that, a language. Very much like in .NET, Visual Basic was just a language. Along came another language, C#, that came along and implemented new features that developers seem to really take a hold on. Same thing here. The idea was eventually they could come along with another language that people could really take to and give people options. There will still be holdouts, kind of like myself, who will still use the JSON, but when we want to introduce new people to infrastructure automation, maybe we'll have a language that's a little bit easier to understand in parts. So let's look at how we can build the storage account using the Bicep language. So I'm going to create a new file. Actually, I have Visual Studio Code open. Before I create this new file, missed one step. I'm going to go to extensions. And if I don't already have it installed, I'm going to install the Bicep extension. Now, what this does is it creates a Bicep language server that you can use on your local machine, and it gives you validation, IntelliSense, all the stuff that you get with programming code built right into Visual Studio Code. So this makes it incredibly easy to build your Bicep template if you've never built it before. So going in, I can create my very first Bicep template. I'm going to call this deploy.bicep. And once I open up this deploy.bicep file, I can create a template for a storage account. So looking at the portal, there's really only one thing I really need to know to create a storage account, and that is what type of resources Azure storage considered. Well, if I look here, the type of resource is Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. If that seems arbitrary to you, don't worry about it. I'll show you how to look up that value in a second, which is just for now. Just trust me and follow me along this wonderful infrastructure automation journey, right? So we're going to create a resource. We're going to say resource storage account. So I did two things here. I created I used the resource keyword, indicated I'm going to create a brand new resource. I'm going to call this resource storage account. Now I need to tell it what type of resource we're going to create. So right now, this resource is named storage account. This is just a variable name if you're used to programming code. So this is a variable name I'm going to use within this template. This doesn't actually mean anything from the Azure side of things, just a variable name. So I'm going to use a single quote, and I'm going to type in Microsoft.storage. And I can manually type it out, or I could tab complete, just like you would do in a programming environment. Now it's going to say which version. So we're going to use the @ symbol, and I'm going to choose whatever version I want to use. So here, I'm just going to go with latest stable, which seems to be 2021, June 1st. Works for me. Now this is where the magic happens. I'm going to go equals, and it's going to say, okay, you need to create an object. I can either fill out the required properties for you. What? Or you can build this out manually. Since I'm teaching you how to do this, we'll build it out manually. But I promise you, I'll show you how that magic required properties feature works. So we'll build out a new object, and notice we get red squigglies. Hey, I can't create a storage account because Microsoft Storage/storage accounts at version 2021 0601 requires the following properties: kind, location, name, and SKU. Wonderful. We're already getting real-time checking. Now, a couple things I want to point out here. This is our resource provider and type, Microsoft Storage/storage accounts. That's what we're creating our storage account. This is a version. This is the version of that type and provider we're pointing at. This means that this is frozen in time. If down the road Microsoft releases a new version of Azure Storage that requires 3 new properties, it's not going to impact us. Our template is still going to work. They have to release a new version of this, and this new version can't break the older versions. So that means if at this point in time the only things required kind, location, name, and SKU, they can't go backwards and say, okay, now everybody in the past need to add a new property called favorite rainbow color. The idea here is that once you lock into a version, that your template is stable. So let's go in and say name. I'm going to say Sydney Andrews store. Location, I'm going to put this in East US. The kind of storage account, well, I don't know what kinds of storage accounts there are. Luckily, there's autocomplete. I can do blob storage, file storage, blob storage, storage V2. Let's do storage V2. All right, things are looking good. And it says one more, SKU. Those are the 4 things it said I needed. Here it says SKU is an object. It has that again. It says I can fill out the required properties for you. Do you want me to do that? We're not going to do it yet. we're just going to say, okay, I need to create an object for SKU. Here it is, our squiggly again. It says, okay, you have an object for SKU, but SKU requires one property called name. We need the name of the SKU. For this SKU, I'm going to go with the cheapest option, which is standard locally redundant storage. And there's our Bicep template. This is far more readable already. We're creating a storage account called Sydney Entry Store, located East US. It's storage V2. Standard locally redundant storage is the SKU we're going to use. I already saved it. So if I want to deploy this, I could just use the Azure CLI. Now I should be able to go in, jump up, and use the Azure CLI to create a deployment. Now here's the beautiful part. Remember I said Azure Resource Manager templates? They're all just templates at the end of the day. Bicep is just a language used for the template, alternative for JSON. So if you've ever deployed an ARM template before, you've already seen how to deploy this. AZ deployment is the name of the command Azure CLI. Now we're gonna need to target the deployment. What type of deployment? Subscription level, resource group level. We're gonna do a resource group level deployment. So AZ deployment. The scope is group. So AZ deployment group. We're gonna create a new deployment. Now for this deployment, we're going to tell it where we're deploying to. So the resource group I'm gonna select is called Bicep. And then what are we deploying? Well, this template file. Normally, we will put so-and-so.json, and that would be our ARM template. For this, all I have to do is put deploy.bicep. That's it. If you've done ARM templates before, you already know these commands. All right, hopefully no syntax errors. Hit enter. And there we go. By the way, if you have the latest version of Azure CLI running, you already have all the Bicep commands. So there's nothing specifically Bicep-y you have to install, as long as you have the latest Azure CLI. So I'm going to go to the portal. I just want to show you what this looks like from the other end. So I'm going to go to my Bicep resource group. There's one deployment that's currently being deployed. It's called deploy. This is a really fun fact. If you don't name your deployment, the name of your deployment is automatically the name of the file without the extension. Since our file name is deploy.bicep, our deployment name is called deploy. It deployed a single storage account called Sydney Entry Store. You're going to love this. If we go to template, it shows us our template using the JSON syntax. This is the same exact template we built using Bicep, but in the JSON syntax. Type Microsoft storage account. There's our API version, our name, our location, our SKU, and our kind. Again, just different syntaxes here. Somebody says, okay, I'm going to try to answer questions. Some of the longer questions I may have to get to at the end of the webinar. All right, first question we'll try to answer. So it says, hey, if somebody releases a new public service in Azure, what's the latency between a template type being released in Bicep versus it being released in ARM? Like, is there a period of time where I have to deploy it using ARM templates while waiting for the Bicep version to be ready? What about preview services? The answer is Bicep is just a language choice over the JSON ARM templates. So if the resource type is available, it doesn't matter whether you use a JSON Bicep template. It's available across both. You will also find that many resources are available for deployments using those JSON or Bicep language ARM templates long before you see them in the CLI portal or anything like that. That's because a lot of the tooling, whether that's Visual Studio Code IDE, the portal, PowerShell, CLI, all those tooling tend to use the Azure Resource Manager templates and tooling like that underneath the hood. So those resource types, resource providers have to be fixed and baked underneath in order for any of this other stuff to be built on top of it. So the answer is there's no latency between something being built and ready for a JSON template or a Bicep template. Okay, Is there an easy way to translate an existing resource group into a Bicep template? I'm not aware of a way to convert a JSON existing resource group into a Bicep template. I know I saw something, and I'll come back to this at the end of the webinar. I thought I saw something where there's some type of command to convert templates back and forth between JSON and Bicep. I have not personally played around with that. I do a lot of net new scripting, so I don't really do a lot of conversions existing resource groups. But that's where I would be digging if I was looking to try to figure out the answer to that. I'm going to save this question, see if I can find the answer to that later. Yeah, a lot of questions around that. Hey, the portal right now produces your template in JSON instead of Bicep. When are we going to be able to produce a Bicep? I have the same question. I would love the answer to that because yeah, right now it's pretty cool that produces the JSON, but I would love to see the Bicep version side by side. So a lot of great questions from the audience so far. All right, somebody says template parameters. We'll get to that in a second. Definitely lots of really good questions. We got some longer, deeper questions, but I'll probably kick those a little bit towards the end of the webinar just so that I can. And somebody actually somebody put a link. Yep, there is a way to decompile a JSON template to Bicep. I knew I saw something that said, hey, yeah, you can go JSON to Bicep, and it's not something that's come up in practice for me. Yeah, there's definitely something to decompile a JSON template to Bicep, because essentially what you do is you compile a Bicep to JSON to send it to JSON across the wire. Because at the end of the day, when you're deploying an ARM template, you're sending a HTTP request with a JSON body, and so so essentially you're compiling a Bicep into JSON. So the reverse would be decompiling. So thank you everybody in the audience who sent the link to decompile it. I knew I saw it somewhere. I'm going to post this link in Q&A for everybody else to enjoy. That's the beauty of doing a live webinar. You always have people in the audience who have way different experiences than you, who gone deeper in different sides of things. Okay, so kicking back, just so when I talk to people about Bicep for the first time, I start talking about some of the advantages of how we can iterate quickly, because this is the same advantages that we have with regular JSON ARM templates. When we can deploy to the same resource group, and it checks for the existence of the resource first, and then if that resource already exists, it will deploy the delta between whatever resource or resources there and whatever is in our template. So like looking at this, if I just want to, like, let's say I want to make this template a little bit better, I could do that. I could do things like I can, instead of saying, I believe my resource, just make sure I get this right. I want to make sure my Bicep resource group is in ECUS. So I can do really cool things like use Azure Resource Manager functions. So instead of saying location is ECUS hard coded, I can say, look at my resource group, IntelliSense, and get the location property of my resource group. Boom. I don't have to hard code my location. Wonderful. I can also do things like create variables and use variables like you see in regular Azure Resource Manager JSON templates. So I can create a variable and call it storage account name and just put the value Sydney Andrews store in that variable. I get a yellow squiggly because I have a variable that's not used, just like you would see in something like C#. So let's go ahead and use that variable, storage account name. All right. So I functionally refactored this template. I've used a variable, I've used a function, but when it's compiled to JSON, or actually, excuse me, that was compiled to JSON. The result of this template should be the same. It's still going to deploy location ECUS. The name is going to be the same. So the result of this should be no change. Let's test that theory. So I'm going to do a new deployment, AZ deployment group create. Well, actually, let me clear my screen first. AZ deployment group create resource group Bicep template for deploy Bicep. Now, if I hit enter, it's going to create another deployment called deploy. And that's going to, if I go to the portal, it's going to just have the same deployment name. So I'll just call this, you said the name argument, deploy v2, just so I can differentiate, right? So jumping in, we'll wait for this to kick off. And there we go. So we're going to go into the portal. We're going to look at our deployments. There's deploy v2. Whoa, that was fast. We'll see. It validated that status is okay. You say, okay, what does that mean? And I have this all hidden. So let's see if I can unhide this real quick. So you see that this storage account already existed. So it didn't need to do anything. So this was really fast. And you see template still used the functions, and everything translated to the correct JSON syntax by Azure Resource Manager templates. But for the Bicep side, the authoring tasks were just so much easier. Now I can keep iterating over this. I can go in and let's say my company comes up with a new standard that we have a prefix, and we take this prefix and we use a unique string after that. So let's say my prefix is Sydney, and then I'm going to put a function after that. So a little string concatenation. And if you've ever done Azure Resource Manager JSON templates before, you know you can use the unique string function, pass it in some type of seed. So I'm going to pass in a resource group .id. Now, what this means is every time it runs unique string, it's going to use the unique identifier for my resource group as the seed. So if my resource group identifier never changes, which it should never change, I will always get the same unique string on every deployment. So all resources that have this unique string resource group ID will have the same unique string within that same resource group. So I can use this template across many different resource groups, and every resource group will have its own distinct unique string. But within that resource group, we'll have the same unique string. Pretty cool way of making sure that a name that has to be globally unique is still predictable within a resource group. Now, if I deploy this, what's going to happen is that it's going to create a second storage account, because technically the name has changed. So it's not the same resource. When it looks for this resource, it's going to say, hey, this isn't found. I need to create this. Let's try that out. So AZ deployment group create. This time I'm going to call this deploy v. Oh, I used to say name deploy v2. Someone says, hey, if Microsoft updates resources really often, how do we keep our templates in sync? The answer is you only update your templates if you need to. I have Azure Resource Manager templates in production running off of some version numbers that are embarrassingly old. But the reality is they work. So whenever the product team publishes a new version number, so for example, they go in and they say, okay, we're going to create the 2022-01-03 version of this resource provider and type. They need to make sure that this doesn't break compatibility with any existing templates across the older versions. So that's one of the key things behind versioning, is that once I write this template and I lock into this specific version number, I'm good to go. I don't have to update this unless I want to take advantage of a new feature, or I don't know, I have extra developer hours to burn and I want to update templates. It's really down to personal preference. So a really good example of that is that a long time ago, app service plans were really, really fudgy to create. And somewhere in 2020, they really, really improved the resource provider. So much so that I went to a couple of clients and said, yeah, go ahead and update your version numbers for your Azure Resource Manager templates, because it went from 30 lines down to 10 lines. This was in the JSON syntax. So that just for simplicity of reading and maintenance, it was worth it. Somebody says, if I run the same template 6 times, does it drop and recreate the resource 6 times? Absolutely not. If the resource already exists, it will skip it because it already exists. So let's take this Bicep deploy v2. Looks like it's created my second resource group, Sydney, and then its unique string. So, pretty cool. Let's take this a little bit further. What if we wanted to use a parameter? Somebody asked about a parameter earlier. Let's just create a parameter. So param, I'm going to call this storage account prefix. It's the name of my parameter. And instead of hard coding my prefix in here, I will use string concatenation. So storage account prefix plus the unique string. And that's how we're going to come up with the name of our storage account. So let me walk you through what I just did. I created a parameter called storage account prefix of type string. I have a variable called storage account name. Uses string concatenation to concatenate the prefix plus the unique string. Then I create my storage account resource. The cool thing about this is now the cool thing about this is now I can use this template using a parameter in a couple of different situations where I might want to maybe change the prefix depending on the environment or change a setting. Maybe I want to change the SKU. Let's see, var SKU equals standard LRS. That could be a variable that we use here, or I can make the SKU a parameter env string, and then use that instead of the variable. The idea here is that we can use a combination of parameters and variables to kind of make switches. So I always hate this example, but examples that's always been given to me is think of like t-shirt sizes. You order t-shirts, now you need to choose what color t-shirt you want and what size t-shirt you want. You know, one size t-shirt doesn't fit everyone. Not everybody's going to want the same color t-shirt. So it's all about the configuration of templates so that can fit many different scenarios. So we'll take this template and let's deploy this. So I clear this screen, easy group deployment, create, name, resource group, Bicep, template file, deploy.bicep, name, let's call this with param, and parameters is the new argument we're going to add. This is where we specify parameters. Now, if you ever done R templates before, you can pass in a parameters JSON file. It uses the same exact JSON file that you would use for JSON-based R template. Or you can hard code them in the command line if you want to do it that way. If you're using some type of continuous integration, continuous deployment platform, you can do your parameters through that mechanism too. So parameters here, I'm going to say, I believe storage account prefixes. What I call this? Yeah, storage account prefix. Storage account prefix equals prod SA or PRDSA. Hopefully that's not too long. We'll hit enter. Oh, I did the wrong command. It's AZ deployment group commit create. This might actually work. The command back in the day used to be AZ group deployment create, and off of muscle memory, I typed in the wrong one. It's actually AZ deployment group create. The reason is because you want to create an AZ deployment, and your scope is a group. When they first created Azure CLI, at the time, you were only deploying to resource groups. And so it's AZ group deployment, and they just flip group and deployment around. I apologize about giving the wrong command. All right. This might have worked anyways, but let's see. We'll go to our resource group with param. We created a new storage account, PRDSA, with our unique string at the end. Lots of fun stuff. Somebody says, can I create multiple resources in one Bicep file? You absolutely can. Can I maintain resource dependencies in Bicep? Yes, we can. We can reference other dependencies. We can reference dependencies within the same file. Lots of cool stuff there. Let's go to, I mean, this is an okay example. Let's go to some child dependencies of this storage account resource. One of the cool things about storage accounts is you can enable certain services like blob services. So the way we normally do that is we have to create a child resource. So I'll create one called storage blob services, Microsoft .storage, storage accounts, and I believe blob services. I'll do it at the same version, 2021-0601 equals. And then this time, instead of doing the object, I'm going to use that magic required properties. And it says, okay, for storage blob services, the only thing you need is a name. Really? That's all you need? This one, if you've never done it before, just use default. That's the name you need. Now, this hanging out by itself doesn't mean anything. I want this to be the storage blob services for my storage account. So I am going to add, and I'm just double checking my syntax, make sure I don't get this wrong. I'm going to add one more property called parent, and this is unique to Bicep. This is where I can reference another resource using a variable name, storage account. Let me add another resource. Resource storage container. Same concept. Microsoft.storage, storage accounts, blob services, container. Same version, 2021, June 1st, equals required properties. The only thing it needs for container is a name. I will call this data-logs. I think a hyphen is legal for a container. We'll find out really quickly. What do we need for its parent? We will do storage blob services. So now I have 3 resources within one Bicep file. Storage account is the parent for storage blob services. And storage blob services is the parent for storage container. Let's deploy this. Remember, I haven't changed anything up here, so this storage account already exists. So it should skip this step. And just to prove I'm not doing any demo tricks, here's with param. Here's the prod SAT. If I go to containers, no containers. All right. So I'm going to change the deployment name from with param to with param and containers. Hit enter. Oh, I forgot to switch AZ deployment group deployment to deployment group. I'm having too much fun. Let's see if I can answer a couple more questions. Somebody just asked me how you reference existing resources parent. At that point, there's actually a function where you can get the resource ID for existing resource by using things like the provider type, API version, and a unique identifier. Does Visual Studio Code show syntax errors if I mix multiple versions within dependencies? I actually haven't tried that. I wonder if that will show an error. Okay, so we're done. So theoretically, we should have a container within here. Hit refresh. There's our data logs container. And we essentially used a Bicep template to create a container within this storage account. Pretty cool stuff. Anybody else? Let me do one more storage demo. One more storage demo. Then I'll show you this with a completely different resource. Because I think I played out storage. But storage is always the best place. If you try this at home, start with storage. I highly recommend start with storage. One is because storage is the simplest thing to create in Azure. It spins up really fast, as you can see, and you can make a lot of mistakes. The amount of storage accounts you can create within a resource group is pretty massive. So you can make a lot of mistakes. Just delete the whole resource group, start over. It's just really fun to like play around and use that as a way for you to learn how to do it. You don't have a lot of dependencies you have to play around with. If you want to create some child resources, you can create some containers or you create some file shares. Storage account is what I highly recommend you use if you're playing around and you learn how to use Bicep for the first time. All right, so we have our resource group. This is our Bicep resource group. Now I'm going to show you something really cool here. We have 2 things I want to show. The first is our resource visualizer. We don't have any relationships here that we care about, but if we did, you can actually see the visualizations of that. These used to be tools that are outside of the portal. They're inside now. Another one that you'll see that's inside the portal is the Resource Explorer. So if I click Resource Explorer, this will allow me to go to my subscriptions, resource groups. There's my Bicep resource group and look at the different resources. So there's my prod storage account, and I can look at the properties of this. So see, there's all sorts of interesting properties here. Let's look at a common situation. Every time I deploy this template, I want to output the URL of the blob storage endpoint so that we can use it maybe for some requests that we're going to do in a follow-up script. So looking at this, basically we have, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. We have an object and it has some properties, a child object, which has primary endpoints, and then has a blob property within primary endpoints. So I should be able to reference that by using Bicep. So just like with Azure Resource Manager JSON templates, we can also create outputs. Now remember, I haven't changed anything up here, so all of this already exists. Now I can create another container. I have data logs. Now I can do ops logs, storage container, ops, storage container data, maybe. So maybe it'll just create a second container here. I can go in, do other things. I can create an output. And now this is where it gets really fun. I'm going to call this output storage endpoint. It's of type string. Now, here's how I define output. Equals to storage account dot properties dot primary endpoints dot blob. Not only do I get IntelliSense, but I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. So then I go back, clear my script, easy deployment, group create, gonna do it right this time, resource, group, Bicep, template, file, deploy.bicep, name, I'm gonna call this with output, parameters, storage account prefix equals, and this is the part where I'm hilariously bad at this. I don't remember. I think it was PRDSA, but I can actually go look this up. Well, if I go to with parameter containers, I can go to inputs. I'll turn my mask off and see my storage account prefix is PRDSA. So I go in, PRDSA, hit enter. Somebody said, do resources in a Bicep template need to appear in the correct order? They do. They do not. They do need to reference each other correctly, but I don't think there's a specific order they need to appear in an ARM template, or a JSON-based ARM template. All right, so we're done. Now look at this. We have our deployment. There's an output property of our deployment called storage endpoint, and there's our storage endpoint with the blob URI so that we can access blobs within this storage account. Very cool. I can also go into the portal, go to Bicep, look at my deployments. This deployment called without. If I click on this, I see here's my JSON template, my parameter storage account prefix. There's my variable SKU and storage account name. There's my storage account resource, my blob services resource, my containers resource, my second containers resource, and my output definition. So what is this? A 58-line JSON file? I mean, it's a 30-line Bicep file, but the readability is dramatically different. But again, this is personal choice. You can choose which one you prefer to do, right? I can go in and see the parameters, PRDSA. I can go and see the inputs, which I have this hidden because of my mask, and toggle that off, PRDSA, and I can see the outputs, which is the blob URI. So all of this stuff is still visible in the portal, much like we see much like we'll see in with a JSON-based ARM template. Let's look at an example where we depend upon another resource by inferring a relationship. So, like I said, we create a lot of storage accounts, but I want to do 2 more types of accounts before I wrap it up for today. One of the things we created a lot within this webinar is app service resources, whether it's web apps, logic apps, or function apps. And I felt like this would be a good place for us to just jump in and use the information we gained to build a Bicep file. Now, normally when we create an app service resource, we need to create an app service plan. And we could do that. And if you've never tried to create one before, you can actually go look up the documentation for this. So it's docs.microsoft.com/Azure/templates. And I put this link in the Q&A already. And this is the reference for ARM templates, whether they're JSON or Bicep. And you can look it up based upon the type of resource you want to create. So today I want to create a web resource. This is why I said the name of the mask extension. I think it's called AZ Mask. Another Azure MVP wrote it, and it's not even I don't even know if it's published in Marketplace. I think it's on GitHub somewhere. I've had it for so long I have no idea where I got it from. All right, so we have Azure templates, and we're going to create a web resource. Now, there's two types. There's websites and web server farms. Server farms are app service plans, and the websites are the web apps or function apps or logic apps themselves. The difference being the kind properties indicating whether it's an app, a function app, or a workflow app. The server farms are essentially are app service plans. So just to keep things super simple, let's create a simple web app. So I'm going to go into Bicep. I'm going to create a resource called App Service Plan. I'll type Microsoft.web/server farms. I'm going to just use, just to prove you can use older versions, just no problem. 2020-0601 equals, but just create an object. Now, I'm going to call this, let's call this web hosting plan. Location, resource group dot location. What type of hosting plan do I want to make? Let's make a Linux plan. SKU, well, that's an object. Now, you say, how do I know that's an object? Well, it tells me right here with the curly braces. Now, SKU has a property called what type of SKU I want to create. Let's do S1 for standard one. And properties, I'm going to select reserved. So I hit save, and that's my app service plan. Now, all of this is on our GitHub repo, by the way. So if you're looking, you're like, oh man, you kind of go through it kind of fast. I'm doing it on purpose because this is not very exciting. This is a Linux app service plan. Super simple. I can switch this to F1 for free if I wanted to just keep things super simple if you're replicating this. So AZ deployment group create resource group Bicep template file deploy to Bicep name web app. Let's cook it. I misspelled resource group. That was bound to happen. While that's running, I wanted to call out. Now, Bicep is at 1.0. But one of the cool things about Bicep is that if you search, Bicep has a repo. It's github.com/Azure/Bicep. There's a pretty active community on Azure for Bicep. There's still, even though it's 1.0, a lot of people are using it. It's still a like as with any other thing, still some weird edge cases people are finding. Like if I do this one weird thing and turn this other thing around, I run into an issue. And so as you can see, they have a really advanced support workflow. So if you ever run into like a super technical issue where I used the feature and some weird behavior happened and this is not expected, the Oh, wow. As you can tell, I haven't looked here in a while. Support portal, dashboard, export, and bicep decompile. You can see that this is where you would go to put up any issues that you have with Azure Bicep that you can't figure out for the documentation. All right, let's see where we're at. Looks like our deployment is finished. Let's go back to the portal. Go to our Bicep resource group. There's our web hosting plan, app service plan. We go to deployments tab. We'll see create a web app deployment. No inputs or outputs that we defined, but we have a template. There's our web server farm, web hosting plan, free tier, Linux, and it's reserved. Super simple. Let's create a web app. So resource app, web app, Microsoft.web, sites, no, not server farm, sites. There we go. Let's do same version. Equals. And then this is where it gets fun. We want a globally unique name. So I'll say web app. And this is where I use my unique string, pass it in my resource group identifier. Location, we'll do same thing, resource group dot location. Now, web apps, this is actually enough to deploy. But I want to show something really cool. Back in the day, you used to have these things called depends arrays, and you can set dependencies between resources, and it was very mucky. I wasn't a fan. I'm pretty sure some people in the community wasn't a fan. But now, if you reference another resource from one resource, you can infer a dependency. So when we create a web app within Azure, we have to reference that. We have to reference a server farm using the server farm ID within the properties. So we have a property called server farm ID. We can go app service plan.id, and by referencing app service plan here, we've inferred a relationship between this web app and this app service plan. So essentially, we told the underlying system that web app depends on app service plan already existing. I'm just going to also set up site config because this is a Linux-based app service plan instance. So for this web app, I want to set up what actual development environment to use. So things Node 14 LTS is what I want. All right, that's my template. I'm going to go ahead and deploy that. This time, web app Node is the name. Hopefully I didn't get any typos. I was doing a lot of typing really fast there. And then once that is deployed is finished, just to show you web app node. Again, no inputs, no outputs. Just want to show you that template though. Notice it adds the depends on, which is required within a JSON template. That's because the server farm ID created a inferred dependency, which means in JSON we'd have to add a depends on, which is not required in Bicep, but is required in JSON. So again, the Bicep language allow us to skip unnecessary ceremony because it during the compilation step it was able to intelligently say, since you're referencing another resource, we can go ahead and assume you depend on that resource. All right, just jumping back. Looks like our deployment has completed. We're going to just jump in. We go to Bicep. We're going to refresh. There's our web app running on Node platform. So there's lots of other services you can create. If you go to our GitHub repo, you'll see we have lots of examples using things like Cosmos DB. We have examples on how to deploy a function app or a logic app. You'll notice that logic app If you know how to deploy a web app, you just need to add some app settings to deploy a function app. If you know how to deploy a function app, you just add a couple more app settings to deploy a logic app. All those examples build on top of each other. We had lots of good questions today. I tried to answer as many as I can, but some of those super technical, super deep that I might not be able to answer in the webinar format. So just wanted to show our email one more time, just because we want to make sure that we don't ignore any of these questions. So that's msusdev@microsoft.com, msusdev@microsoft.com. If you got super technical questions about like the business prop, the value of using Bicep, send us those type of questions. We have some people, especially who are talking and evangelizing Bicep, who can speak better to more of the business prop side of it. I'm just a nerdy technical person who just likes writing code and doing the technical side of things. This has been a great series. Really enjoyed having everybody here. Really enjoyed having the group. Matt, I'm going to hand it right back to you. Matt, I think you're muted.
Thank you. That's why I turned my camera on, so people can tell me I'm muted. Great session, really lively. Thanks to everyone. Please do send email and we'll follow up with you. We'll get this recording posted up on our YouTube channel, Microsoft Dev Radio, shortly. Thank you.